Hello, I'm Judith Pinero, Executive Director of AAMC and AAMC Foundation. Our offices are in Manhattan, and today I'm speaking to you from Brooklyn, both locations in New York City, which are situated upon the unceded seized territory of the Lenape and Canarsie peoples, and benefited from the economies of slavery and the labors of African-descended captives. We owe our existence and vitality to generations from around the world who were brought here against their will, drawn here to escape persecution, and some that have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. We pay respect to their communities, past and present. This acknowledgement asks us each to consider many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us here together today. AAMC is dedicated to an environment in which all individuals are treated with respect and dignity at our programs. Each individual has the right to be in a professional atmosphere that prohibits discriminatory practices, including harassment. Our full code of conduct policy for all our programs, as well as the outlets to make a direct or an anonymous report of a violation, has been posted in the chat feature. It is a pleasure to welcome you today for our virtual discussion. We hope that you and our community of colleagues, allies, and supporters around the globe are healthy and safe. Thank you to our attendees for making space in their schedule to join us. We are also grateful for the collaborative effort in creating this program, including our speakers, and we give gratitude to our partners as well: the Association of African American Museums, the American Alliance of Museums, the Association of Art Museum Directors, the Association of Academic Museums and Galleries, the Museum Association of the Caribbean, the Museum Computer Network, and School of Museum Studies at the University of Leicester. I also want to specifically thank Carolyn, Ross, and Lauren for their unwavering commitment to advance the museum community. They are incredibly open, humble, gracious, and generous. We're all better for having their engagement in our community. Thank you. And now, to begin the program, I hand it to our speakers.
Judith, thank you. And my goodness, humble is the word. We're humbled by those generous and kind words, but we're also humbled by the number of organizations that you can see across the screen now that have come together, an ensemble, an act of solidarity and sort of collective action to speak to some of these important questions around digital today. But we're also, and perhaps mostly, humbled by all of you, by you finding 75 minutes in your busy days, wherever you are across America, particularly today, or around the world, to join us in this conversation. We know these are challenging times. We know these are difficult times in so many ways: personally, politically, professionally, culturally, societally, intellectually. But for you to decide to share this next hour or so with us, that means a lot. That means a lot to us. So we want this to be rewarding for you, and we want this to be productive and useful for you. So I'm delighted to be joined by Carolyn Royston from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum, New York, but also from my researching colleague, Dr. Lauren Vargas as well, from the School of Museum Studies at the University of Leicester. We are going to structure the next hour or so in hopefully a way that makes sense, that there's a very clear sort of narrative for you to kind of follow with us. We sit within 3 readiness webinars that are trying to understand the challenges we have now, where we've been, the needs that we have at exactly this moment. And Lauren's going to help us in a moment to remind us what we confronted in that first workshop together with those extraordinary, passionate, incisive practitioners that shared that session with us. Today, we start to reflect upon those needs and think, what could we be doing? And we want to talk a little bit about a project that we've been running over the last 3 years called One by One, and not just what it's done to bring people together, to bring partners together in a new, open, exciting, respectful, equitable formation, a new collaboration, a type of working together in our sector, but the work that it's done, what it's actually managed to produce and achieve and understand. Then what we'd like to do, holding our hands out to the colleagues who'll be running the 3rd webinar, is to think about where we could be going next. And we'll be thinking together with you on what those real clear actions, those substantive steps that we could be making together could be. Okay, so this will be sort of structured conversations. So we may show the odd slide now and again, and I'm sure those slides will be made available with colleagues through AAMC to everyone who's part of this workshop. We'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A as well, and the chat. So please, if there's anything that's not clear, if there's anything you'd like us to reflect upon more deeply, if there's own experiences that you have that you think speak to this conversation, if there's questions that you have about what we've been doing, please put them in the chat, and Lauren will very skillfully kind of host that last half hour of the session where we'll reflect on those. Okay, so this is about us nationally as a sector, but also internationally, thinking about how we can become more digitally confident. This is about us understanding digital transformation within art museums. This is thinking about all of your organization, from your vision to your mission, how you lead, how everyone is leaderful in their behavior around digital, the culture we set, the atmosphere in our organizations, the behaviors we validate, the language we use, but also how we empower and enable and give agency to everyone within our workforce to contribute to digital change. Lauren, in the last workshop, you hosted that first session, and the panel gave us such a vivid and such a rich picture, and called out what needed to be called out about where we are today around digital transformation, particularly bearing in mind the last 12 months. For our benefit as a panel, but also for everyone in the room, and particularly those that maybe weren't there, could you take us through some of those kind of key ideas that came through?
Sure. So the first webinar was really about giving a sense of context about digital engagement in this very moment. So we started the previous webinar by discussing past and present challenges by completing the statements like, I like, I wish, I wonder. And Marie Vickles did a wonderful job in really setting up our conversation. And she said, I wish this moment would bring us closer to each other after being pushed apart. And how could we use this time to be more reflective? And she made a key observation that not everything we thought was necessary is actually necessary. We learned that, quite strongly in 2020. And this led to a broader discussion about empathy, inclusion, access, and collaboration. And we had a discussion, and it really was that. If you haven't watched the first webinar, I could have spent many more hours with that particular panel. But it wasn't about having a digital first lens, but discussing how digital enables or hinders our organizational cultures. Catherine Devine helped us by understanding and advocating that we need to listen and consider all perspectives, not just those in executive positions, that by nature, hierarchical structures are inequitable, and that these types of discussions about our corporate structures, our organization structures, require a great or a vast amount of self-awareness, and that others have knowledge or perspectives that you don't have. So how do we start to build the skill and the muscle to accept and make space for those perspectives? Nikhil Trivedi reminded us that connection requires trust, and trust requires equity. And we need to bring more colleagues into our process. And that requires vulnerability on both sides, to share our knowledge, but also to ask questions, to admit that we don't know, we don't understand. And we must go beyond the performative and share what is imperfect and what is in progress. Sandra Jackson DeMont stated the importance of advocating and building skills to help us have difficult conversations and not place the burden on the persons impacted. She challenged us to consider how we make space for more voices, how we might handle conflict, hold space for multiple truths, and that we need these skills to act on the issues and ideas in this very moment, and that we have to go beyond transactional work and focus on the health and welfare of our organizations. What I loved most about her contributions was this call or this challenge for accountability, and how do we measure these skills in our development and our performance plans? And what this boils down to is that it's not necessarily a technology problem that we face. This is yes, we do have technology, technical competencies that we need to learn, challenges that we need to overcome. But at the heart, we have a communication challenge or an opportunity. And what skills, do we practice that we need to actively cultivate to work harder to be human in a remote working environment, in a digital first environment that we currently face? And how do we not default to these dehumanizing tactics at a time when we need connection the most? So this is all coming together, as we are now, as we did in December, and it's a step towards progress and holding space for these really difficult conversations.
And Lauren, thank you so much for that. I can hear Sandra, Nicole, and Catherine and Marie in the room. And if they're in this conversation now, thank you so much. The way that you set the bar high, you said what needed to be said, you gave us the vocabulary to start to articulate that with such precision and subtlety. So thank you. And now we will do our best to continue the conversation informed by your thoughts. Before I kind of hand over to Carolyn, and we maybe together, Carolyn, get a sense of why we think the way we're working on One by One is effective as a collaboration, I'll just spend a couple of 3 minutes just making clear what it is in case you haven't come across it before. For some time, Carolyn and myself and others have been thinking, how could we bring together cultural organizations, academics and places of learning, commercial organizations, policy bodies, professional bodies like AAMC and the other extraordinary communities of practice that are part of this partnership event tonight, how we could work together openly and generously and be more effective together. We also wondered what would happen if we took a learning mindset. So rather than stepping forward and saying we have the answers, what if we follow Sandra's inspiration and say, and also Nicole's inspiration and say we don't know, and be prepared to be open and vulnerable and trust each other in that space to say, we need to figure this out together. But to do so, we're going to have to admit as organizations what we don't know and what needs to change. And as well as having that trusting, vulnerable, open, safe space for a collaboration that brings key players in our sector together, we also thought, what would happen if we took a research idiom to this? If we explored this as a research project, as scholarship, as an investigation, that we were learning together and finding out together and sharing our evidence. So funded by a series of arts and humanities research grants supported in the UK, but I'm delighted to say now supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities in the US as well. One by One is an international multi-partner consortium that has a learning mindset and uses a research idiom to understand what needs to change, what could change within museums nationally and internationally to help them grow their digital confidence and to lead digital change. We have followed 3 projects so far. We're on our 3rd iteration. And one of the things that certainly we'll be calling out at the end of this session are the ways in which you can participate. And as our new project starts on the 1st of February for the next 18 months, how perhaps you and your institution could get involved. Carolyn, you were there from the very beginning. You helped write that first application that said there is another way of doing this. There's another way of bringing organizations together. And you've been on that journey with us for the last four years and a journey we hope will continue. So from your perspective, why does this matter? Why does it matter that this particular project is shaped the way it is?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much to Judith and the other partners in this series for inviting me to contribute. I'm so pleased, and I think this is actually a manifestation of a lot of what we're talking about today, of bringing together professional bodies around shared challenges in the sector, and thinking about how we can be more collaborative and share our knowledge and experience. So it's amazing to be here. Thank you. But in response to your question, Ross, I think that for me, as a practitioner, I've been in museums for over 20 years now and have seen digital grow from being stuck in a corner in someone else's office, working away and no one really caring what I was doing, to, you know, where we are today. I mean, that is an incredible journey that this area of practice has been on and continues to be on. And I could see, as over these last many years, just the challenges around moving digital from being at the side into something that is an activity that permeates everything that we're doing. And it is not possible for one individual or one team to be able to deliver digital across every area of activity in the museum. And that is why I think it has been such a driver for change, and even more so now, in the sense that we have to work collaboratively, we have to work cross-departmentally, we have to break down silos in order and disrupt current practices and processes in order, I think, to really be successful and to achieve the ambitions that I know our organizations have around digital engagement. So for me, it has become hugely important, and how we build digital capacity and skills development across our organizations from the top down and from the bottom up, it has been an ongoing interest for me, some might say obsession. And so, you know, the development of One by One and the way in which it's organized has been really, really important in terms of, you know, how to incorporate and how to involve cross-section of the museum, how to think about how to build it into wider strategic thinking in a museum, and for it to be parts of conversation from the leadership down, but also that buy-in from across the sector in terms of, you know, the professional bodies that we've mentioned today and others in the UK, and also the research institutions, and how we can bring all of these great minds together and our experience and knowledge to really think how to tackle this challenge.
So that self-organisation is quite a key part, isn't it? This is from below, you know, this is practitioners like yourself and other inspirational leaders and workers across the sector in the UK and the US. They came together, you know, they came together at events like, you know, MCN and events like Museums on the Web, and that's where this project came from. So there's something, do you think that there's something in the DNA of the project that's important about the fact that this isn't a top-down directive or some policy or strategy at a federal level or another level, but actually this is coming from the profession itself?
Absolutely, because I think what we're doing in this project is really addressing the challenges that we're facing on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, as Lauren said, those challenges are really people first rather than technology. They're about our organizations, they're about the way that we work. And so really understanding, you know, what the universality of some of those issues, which cut across all of our institutions, whether we're large institutions to small institutions, and then understanding at a local level. You know, every museum is different. You know, it is a snowflake in some respects, and understanding what are the universal challenges that where I can learn from others, and what are the challenges that are specific to our institution that we really need to address, and start from a place of where you are, you know, as an institution. Don't look at the Met or, you know, the British Museum. If you're a small institution, yes, you can learn, but that's not going to be reality in terms of your digital capacity, your digital maturity. So you need to start from where you are and understand, you know, what is your capacity, what is your competency, what is your budget, what are your budgets, and how does digital for my organization fit into our wider strategic aims? And this is, I think, really key in terms of understanding where your starting point is. Because then that enables you really to build on what you're doing. And I think that also we're so fortunate in this sector that I think we are incredibly generous in terms of sharing our knowledge, but also with organizations like AAMC and MCN, AAM and others, where there are a lot of resources available for you to tap into, if you understand what it is that you're looking for and what you need. And I think that's really where the work needs to happen. So my advice always for myself and my organization, but also other organizations that I speak to, is develop an approach that's appropriate for you. Think about small, impactful change over big ambition, and try to deliver something that's going to be possible for your organization to sustain and build on. But really understanding, what do your audiences need? Where are we going to have the most impact? What are the small wins that we can start off if it all feels so overwhelming? And where do we go from there? But fundamentally, at the heart, these are people and process questions, not technology ones. No one, the technology is, for me anyway, the least interesting bit of that equation. And you can always find the answers. There's always something that will deliver something in some form. But it's really about, what is it that you need to do in your organization to have the most impact and to meet the needs of your audiences?
I'm so pleased you said that, Karen, because certainly when Lauren shares some of the work that she's been doing about taking a calm and care approach to leadership, I think we're all going to hear loud and clear that what One by One is helping us see and helping us to find the words to explain is that this is, and it sounds trite, doesn't it? It sounds so glib and surface, but it is about people. We spent, the first time a computer was wheeled into a museum, internationally, was in the mid 1960s, and it was mostly around collections management and sort of understanding records, and it was all about automation. And in that 50 years, half a century of the computer being in the building. And by the way, it was art curators there in New York in 1967 at the birth of MCN that were leading the way. But for half a century, for so much of that, we just wanted to get the technology to work. What technology do we get? What do we procure? What are the standards? How can we get these machines to be reliable, to stay on? How do we pay for them? Which ones should we buy? Let's come up with some standards that can allow kind of content to move across them. All of those questions for the 70s, the 80s, through the 90s. And what happened through the beginning, that first 10 years of this century, is that we started to really focus on the business processes. What is it now that these machines are going to be permanent within our organization? They're in the lives of our workers. They're in the lives of many of our audiences. They're in the institution. They're an inherent part of what museum is, in the way that it communicates to itself and to others. How can we use them effectively, purposefully, sustain them, scale them, be very strategic with them, make sure that they're there effectively, operationally every single day? So we've spent the last 10 years understanding what a digital strategy is. How do we write policies and social media? What are those systems and protocols that need to be in place to enable digital to thrive? And what your work's showing, Carolyn, and what Lauren's work and others are showing on the project is, it's not that we completely forgot, but we overlooked that really you can have the technologies present, you can have those business processes now in place, but now we need to understand the experience, the emotional experience, the values that are around using digital in the museum. You can have the best system in place, the best Wi-Fi, the most sensitive touch interface, the most resilient collections management and content management system. You can have iPads going out to schools. You can have so much of that technology. But if you don't have confident workers in your institution, and you don't have individuals who have a passion for understanding digital and seeing how it's being used in society and designing it effectively and understanding its evolution in your organization, then you're not going to use computing technology effectively. And I think that's what you're helping us to see, Carolyn, in your work. Can I ask you actually then about a very important point, just maybe a kind of final point on this section, in terms of why this matters? You've helped us to see that we self-organized. It was a new type of ensemble, a new way of quite ambitiously bringing together, in our case, the Museums Association in the UK with the AAM in the US, MCN in the US, and MCG in the UK, bringing together partners across the museum sector in the US with very generous partners in the UK. So we had that ambition from below. We've developed this person-centered kind of common vocabulary, but obviously this year, Carolyn, we didn't know, or at least in 2020, we didn't know the project was also going to be playing out within the COVID-19 medical emergency as well. I'm wondering if you might just reflect on that a moment with us as well. What did COVID show us about our digital capability? What new needs did it expose, and how's it shown us how maybe this sort of project is what we need at the moment?
Well, I mean, where do you start with that? I mean, you know, and we're still in it, so it's kind of an interesting thing to, you know, to actually be in a moment of transformation in our field, and I mean, it was, you know, for us here in the US, you know, it really has been a triple crisis around pandemic, social injustice, and economic, devastating economic impact. So for me, the need to transform in our museums has never been more urgent or more critical. And you know, suddenly overnight, we were catalyzed into working virtually. And at Cooper Hewitt, we closed on March the 13th, 2020. We never reopened, and we still don't have a reopening date. So we are still living in this moment for sure. And, you know, like most museums around the world, our staff was suddenly expected to become digital experts overnight. Regardless of the area that they work in, you know, we had to not only produce public-facing resources in new ways, but also we had to learn to work remotely and to use digital tools like Teams, like Zoom, virtual collaboration tools like digital whiteboards, and develop new processes around working in that way. And this has been our new norm for a year now. You know, this is our practice now. And I think for the most part, people have been amazing in terms of their ability to adapt. And I think that the emotional labor that we've asked of our staff, our digital staff, but also other staff who were suddenly expected to know how to produce digital content, you know, oh, just turn that, you used to do that, you know, in the galleries, now just do it, just do it, just put it online, you know, that kind of directive, which is not easy to understand, and often coming from management and leadership positions of people who don't understand the labor that's involved in producing those things, and also understanding the staff that need to be involved, and also understanding that suddenly it's not just about audiences that are coming through your doors, but now you are reaching a national and international audience. But for me, it has been, for all of the challenges and difficulties and sometimes despair that has been felt over the last year, I do feel that there are many opportunities that can come out of this crisis. And it's raised lots of really important questions for me around transformation and change that I'm thinking about as Cooper Hewitt as we eventually emerge from this crisis state that we're in. And, you know, understanding that the world around us has changed, and that, you know, as a museum, how do we want to respond to this change? And if we're not prepared to do that work now, when is the time to do it? It feels like the conditions for change are right here, right now. And so some of the things I'm thinking about are, you know, how do we build on our digital presence and skills? You know, what do we need to do to stay relevant, resonant, and remarkable? And as I said earlier, like what stays the same? What do we let go of? What do our audiences need? Where will we have the most impact? How do we want to use our resources more effectively and efficiently? And if we want to think about building on our digital skills and presence, you know, how do we sustain that new audience that we've built when we do eventually reopen? And I know some people on this call have reopened, but we go back to a more normal state. And how do we continue to grow those audiences, and how do we prioritize those audiences in line with audiences that are coming through our doors? You know, so is it just about revenue? Is it just about ticket sales? Or is it about a deeper engagement? Or is it about, being able to show your relevancy because you have your collections online, you have content online, you're telling stories online, you're staying in the public view through that way. And how do you measure the impact of serving those audiences if they are not likely to visit your museum? And how do you basically keep that ongoing engagement? And how do you build digital into your planning across everything that you do? So if this year has shown us, those museums that perhaps were better equipped in terms of, having some form of digital strategy or some sort of digital roadmap or planning, and resources that are working in these areas, even if they don't have big digital teams, have found that pivot to digital perhaps be a little easier than other museums that really haven't focused on this area or haven't invested in skills for their teams. And how do you continue to build digital capacity across everything that you're doing? So as we talked about, our staff feel increasingly digitally confident about naturally embedding digital in their work, rather than it being something that is an add-on or reliant on, the 1, 2, 3 people that are in your digital team. And how do we work with our leadership teams and heads of departments to ensure that they are embedding digital thinking into their planning and their strategic thinking? And how can we support them in building their own digital understanding? Because if they don't know what questions to ask, if they don't understand why this is important now in our museums going forward, then I think that's a very big problem. And then it then ends up coming down to individuals to drive that change. And that's very difficult when you don't have that support through your leadership teams in your museums. And so I think there are many more questions that are swirling around in my head, but they're questions that I'm really thinking about now and thinking about at Cooper Hewitt. How do I start to talk about those questions in the museum? How do I start to think about what we will take forward, what we will leave behind? I don't think we can go back to a pre-COVID world. I think we do need to reimagine a future that looks different and where change and transformation, rather than it being a kind of catalyzed moment in time born out of crisis where we're just responding all the time. How do we build change and transformation into the fabric of the organization and manage change in a sustainable way that's right for the organization and staff, and where staff feel supported and able to think about change, whether that's digital, whether it's a reimagined visitor experience, whatever it might be, in a way that feels safe and possible to imagine trying new things and being open to new ways of working.
It always seems possible. Whenever I hear you, Carolyn, whenever I sit at your knee and I learn from you, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful and optimistic about where we go next. And it seems counterintuitive that a moment of disruption and fissure and precarity can in fact be the conditions for optimistic and hopeful change. But I think what we're trying to do with our work with you is build that space for reflection that Marie asked for in the first webinar, and to create the tools that can allow us to make a space for the conversation you've had. So maybe Lauren, you and I can sort of make our own pivot now within the conversation. And as we've set that context of why the collaboration exists, why this ensemble exists, why we think it has value, and the principles and values at the heart of it that Carolyn so beautifully framed. Lauren, maybe you and I can now dig into what we've done and actually what we've kind of learned. So if that's all right with you, Lauren, I'll go first and sort of take us through some of the framings that we've learned, and then would it be okay for you to then sort of dive a little bit deeper into some of those ideas around leadership that you've been building as well?
Brilliant.
So what I'd like to do, and I know everyone spends so much of their day looking at PowerPoint, but if you can just indulge us for 5 minutes here. And Lauren, you're seeing that okay? Great. So here are some framings just in 5 minutes to give you something in your hand, something, so maybe there's part of the conversation that's already useful for you, but maybe you're a learner or a practitioner that needs tangible and substantive things. So here are some things that we're going to lay out in front of you over the next sort of 10 minutes or so that gives you an indication of how we work. So big insight for us is that we've been asking the wrong question for 10, 20 years in the museum tech sector. We've been trying to think of a single top-down solution that's applicable to all institutions. And of course, what we really need to understand is that not only do we need to think holistically, as Carolyn has just said, think about your whole organization, but we need to think contextually. You need to decide what digital transformation means for your organization. You will decide your own pathway to digital transformation. You'll decide how much of a digital organization you become and why and how and who will lead that. We'll change our sector and become a digitally confident sector by understanding there's 1,000, there's 500,000 of these change stories that need to take place. There isn't one playbook that says, do it like this, become an organization like this. We'll change our sector one institution at a time, one person at a time, one by one. That's why the project's called One by One. So this from below, person-centered approach to digital change is at the heart of our work. It's about framing your own pathway. Here are some practical tools, and we won't dwell too much, but we just want to sort of walk you at speed. It's a bit of a drive past looking at some of these. So some of the tools we use a deck. So rather than using a set of digital tools, we love the physicality of a set of cards. It's equitable. Everyone can have the cards. They allow you to be playful in sort of infinite number of ways, and yet there are some sort of tight rules that everyone works within. It's accessible, it's a game. Everyone can feel that they're unthreatened by being in the safe space of using a deck, and it's defiantly analog, so it's something tactical and something tangible and tactile in your hand. So we're doing a workshop, and actually we're doing a workshop tomorrow with the Canadian Council for the Arts, a leadership program there where we'll be using this deck. So one of our decks looks at the definition. This is what Carolyn was saying about common language and actually being able to kind of talk together as an institution. So, One by One's helped us to understand what we mean by digital. Digital is something we use. It's a set of tools and hardware and software. But in the museum sector, digital is also something we manage. It's a strategy, it's a process, it's systems as well. It's important we differentiate between that. But we create digital things in the museum sector, our digital interactives, our social media channels, our television programs, our curatorial essays, those digital immersive experiences in our exhibition spaces. So we are interesting as an industry because we create and we collect digital things, digitally born things, but also digital surrogates, things that we create of real physical things. But digital is also a subject of the museum sector. And again, this maybe marks us out compared to other industries, whether it's leisure, retail, finance, gas and oil, security, whatever, publishing. Our industry, it uses digital, it manages digital, it both collects and creates digital, but it wants to reflect upon digital as well as a sector, whether that's digital art, understanding digital artists and different formats of digital art, or understanding the role of art and the art museum and art space within a digital age, and in a moment when our visitors are walking in holding digital technology. So some of our cards and some of our tools within One by One help an organization to kind of reflect on exactly what part of digital they're interested in. Equally, we want to understand what part of it, of you or your team or your organization, needs to be developed. So it may be my competency, it may be how I use particular pieces of technology, but it might be my capability, what I can achieve with technology, or it may be my literacy, how I reflect upon technology. So my competency is that I know how to use a hammer and nails. My capability is I know how to use hammer and nails to make a chair, to achieve something. My literacy is my ability to step back from that chair and think, I should have made a bench, or I needed a bed, or what does good chair making look like in the round? Again, having that higher level of subtlety around understanding what skills are, and they have these elements, is one thing that we're helping organizations to do. And it allows you to speak and identify your needs with more precision. Finally, and then sort of handing over to Lauren, what we've also needed to do in our sector over the last 10, 20, 30 years in our conversations around technology is be more precise about who is it and where is it that we need to make this technological change. Is it at the level of the individual? Is it me? Is it actually I'm a bit scared by computers? It's a thing other people use. Is it me as in my role as documentation assistant or collections manager in my museum or registrar, that actually it's in that professional role? At home, I'm fine. I use an iPad, I send tweets, I do banking, I send email, but in my job, actually that's where my needs are. Is it actually the network of other registrars and collection managers across the country? And actually, as a particular community of practice within our industry, it's that group of people that need to develop their skills. Is it the whole sector? Is it about the museum sector, the art museum sector, having greater confidence about how to curate net art, how to be an art museum online, how to be an art space when visitors are connected when they come into the space, using a collection management system effectively with art collections today? Is that our challenge? Is it at that level? Or is it a societal level that as individuals within our city, within our town, within our state, we need to think about the literacy of the public, and we need to think about the infrastructures that are in place to support them digitally? We've conflated those. And what we're getting better at doing now is identifying, the individual who wants to develop their competency of using a particular piece of software, and differentiating the organization that needs to be better and more capable at managing collection management systems. That's what we're learning to develop. It could be that it's a whole community of practice, heads of digital who want collectively together to reflect upon how society is changing around being a network society, and they want to understand that in a very critical way. Just by playing with cards like this, we're starting to understand that. Just before I hand over to Lauren, another tool we've been using is what Carolyn said about developing a holistic approach. We used to just think that developing as an organization digitally, as an art museum, to become a more technically equipped, a more confident and digitally fluent organization, hey, we'll just send staff on a course. That'll work, wouldn't it? Actually, what we now know through the research we're doing, through listening and learning and working together over these last few years, is that we need not only to take a contextual approach, your skills and with your identity for your ends in your circumstance, but we need to think about the entire organization. Your vision prioritizes digital within your institution. If it's not there as an articulation within the very top level of who you are, everything will always be a struggle. Digital will always be something you're having to justify or bring in from the margins. It's the people who lead who will activate digital, but it's how everyone in the organization leads. And Lauren will take us more into that about these models for understanding leadership in a digital context. Get those processes right, those systems, those protocols, those policies right. Make them digital ready as well. That's what will enable digital to happen. And then build a culture that supports digital, that's proud of digital, that has words for digital, that celebrates it in the everyday discourse of the institution, that validates particular behaviors around experimentation or innovation around digital as well. Create that culture and the other things will thrive. And then value people, give people agency, empathize with how hard digital change is, give people space to learn, to talk, to find their journey to digital at a speed that works for them. That's what we're doing on One by One. We're building tools like this that help us to understand how digital can grow within the art museum and how you can use these different sort of framings to articulate and identify your own digital pathway to maturity. Lauren, do you want to take us into some of the ideas that you've been looking at? Because these are exceptional and extraordinary. And I know these are having a huge impact on museums in the US and the UK. So your idea of care and calm, take us through that.
Sure. So in the first project, I was looking at how leadership activates digital, right? Exactly what you just walked through. And it encompasses all of those elements that you had on that particular slide. But in order to achieve, fusing those various elements together, there were certain ingredients that needed to be in place. And I think so often when we're talking about digital, we have been focused externally, right, on the digital engagement, the VR, the AR, the podcasts, the webinars, the et cetera, fill in the blank. And I strongly believe that if we do not have that agency, that confidence, the skills to think about and wield digital within our own organizations, it's incredibly difficult to engage externally. So what do we need to do to cultivate these spaces that everybody has a chance to be a leader, and to engage in leaderful activities? So in the first project, what really came, those elements that were starting to surface were, we have to have a collaborative environment. We need to think ahead. We need to scenario plan. We need to anticipate what is coming. Change should not knock us off our game. How do we let go of those command and control approaches and methodologies and really start to embrace leaderful practices? It's not just about the role or the title, but about how we make space, how we are mindful of what others are bringing to the table, what others are bringing to the conversation. Now, in that first project, what I started to find was that in order to achieve digital maturity, we needed to have or fuse business intelligence, business skills with emotional skills to then achieve the types of maturity or success or intended impact of our digital activity. So in the second project, which happened over COVID-19, it really meant that to create this environment, this calm approach, we needed to have some other elements, some other ingredients in the mix. So to be collaborative, we have to communicate. And that means we have to be, we have to be taught the skills how to communicate, especially in a digital environment. We have to over communicate. We have to work harder to be human, right? It's not just simply going out on social. It's not just simply standing up a digital community. We have to work to create the scaffolding for these safe spaces, whether they're outside of our museums or internally within our own organizations. We have to learn how to adapt to change, before we can anticipate it, right? What do we do in an if-then scenario? And to be a great leader, we need to learn how to rise strong. What do we do when we have a setback? What do we do when we have a failure? What do our individuals, teams, and organizations collectively do? How do we build that resilience muscle? I hear resilience being thrown around all the time, yet not necessarily what are those actions? What are those practices? What are those processes? What are those rituals that we need to cultivate in our own organizations to build that muscle? And last but certainly not least, how do we immerse ourselves into somebody else's experiences? How do we take that in? How do we make space for multiple truths? And that really comes by, wielding one of the most important emotional skills, and that is being empathetic. So I love a good acronym. So it all kind of, instead of just taking that calm approach, being a little, fun with the acronym and having it be a bit sticky, snackable, so that people could understand and begin to take away what are these elements that we need to have in place and cultivate on a regular basis. How do we take care to be calm?
Lauren, thank you so much. And I'm sure everyone can already hear how that's a fantastic mnemonic, but it's so weighty and it has gravitas and depth, and it's based on years worth of research that you've done, including doctoral research in this area. So this is incisive, and I think it's helping us to notice some important things. Well, look, let's try and bring this together before we turn to the chat and the Q&A, and colleagues join us for the conversation. Lauren, we as a kind of call to action now, where we could be bringing this next. The work that you're doing this coming year, you kind of alluded to that a little bit. You're going deeper into understanding empathy. You're getting deeper into understanding the emotional rather than the technical or business dimension to leading change. Are you able to share a little bit more about that with us?
Sure. So over the course of the next 18 months, we're going to be building a periodic table of skills. And so this is bringing together, everything that Ross just shared, those competencies, capabilities, and literacies in the business realm, in the digital realm, and then to fuse it together, what are those emotional skills? So we're breaking those down into elements. We are actually creating a periodic table. What are those formulas? What are those different combination of elements that we need for various roles, responsibilities in our current, institutions, as well as the institution of the future? How do we use these elements to rethink our training and performance plans, our development plans? Are we resourcing in the right areas? How do we cultivate these elements, these ingredients in all roles, right? Not just the exceptional or those deemed digital or the most savvy, but how do we build this muscle, these muscles across the entire organization? As Carolyn so elegantly put, we have to embed this in to our DNA. And to do that, we have to recognize what are the right formulas, the right mix of these elements that are going to work best to either catalyze that change or work to keep and sustain our institutions that we so love and cherish. So we'll be doing that on the Digital Commons, which is our community, our digital community. And we had started this community as an area for our research cohort to work through COVID and to take a remote working approach to our research, and where we are modeling how to be human first. And so I'll drop into chat an invite, because we're now opening the Digital Commons so that all of you can participate in these conversations and help us build the the periodic table of skills.
Ross, could I, just before we open it up for questions, I'd like to I didn't get a chance before, just to give one very practical example of output that came from the 1x1 project, so people have an understanding of that it's not just research, that actually it was action research, and that there were several interventions that took place during the project with the Smithsonian, and the one that happened at Cooper Hewitt, which actually Lauren led on with the team, was really about how do we build a common language, and how do we start to break down silos to be able to think and learn together. And so one of the action research interventions that Cooper Hewitt undertook was running a virtual workshop where all the staff that worked on producing content across the organization participated in mapping out a content plan for the next 6 months, detailing what we were producing, who was involved, who we thought the audience for the content was, how it was being delivered. Is it through the website? Is it on social media? Is it through newsletters, etc.? And when were we planning to produce and publish this content? Now, because we as a museum do work in silos, which we are trying to break down, we didn't have a forum or a process to look at content holistically. So content was being produced everywhere. And when COVID hit, that everybody kind of was pedaling faster, and we were producing content all over the place, but it wasn't strategic. It wasn't being looked at holistically. It was, we were producing too much content at some times, not enough content at other times, not really understanding who it was for. And also content was tending to be produced by a very small number of people. So again, that emotional labor that was happening. So this was an opportunity for us also to think about our audiences. And we were, are we super serving some? Are we underserving others? What are we doing in terms of our content production? So even though it sounds completely obvious, actually us coming together across departments and disciplines for this workshop and to map it out together and talk out loud about what we're doing, our motivations, why we're doing what we're doing, who's doing what, enabled us to start to develop a common language and a shared understanding of what was happening across the museum. And when we had finished, and this, we could have done this workshop over 2 days. We did it in a morning, I think. What we got was, kind of an unbelievable mess. I'm going to say that in the nicest possible sense. Just so much. There wasn't any way that the museum could deliver on the ambition that we had around all this content. everyone being able to literally take a step back and go, wow, we can't do this, or wow, November looks ridiculous, and then we're not doing enough in December. Just that process in itself was useful. And as a consequence of doing that activity, we have now set up a digital content editorial group so that we can manage our content commissioning and our production in new ways and introduce new processes. We have a new content master calendar, so we can see what content's being produced at any time, and new ways to propose new content that is actually being able to be managed and seen by this group. This is hard work, and it has taken time. We did that workshop in the summer, and we, just before Christmas, managed to kick this group off. But it requires individuals to drive change. But we desperately needed it at Cooper Hewitt, and I think it will get us to a better place. And most importantly, it's an example that I can hold up for the rest of the museum to say, look, here's a project where we are genuinely working across the museum, where we are genuinely working collaboratively and sharing a language, breaking down silos, building understanding, and developing our digital aspects. That was Siri. That was a digital fail in my chair. But anyway, the big point that Siri just ruined was, you know, as a result of doing that intervention that was 3 hours, it enabled us to build on developing a new approach to a really important practice that is really relevant right now for us in the museum for COVID. So I just wanted to, I hope you don't mind me just taking that time. I just wanted to show really, you know, the practicalities around and the opportunities to do small interventions that can have a bigger impact.
It's perfect, because what we're always trying to do as we work in this ensemble is, you know, we might have those, you know, more academic kind of conceptual approaches, and then we may find ourselves thinking in really kind of clear business terms and thinking about those systems and processes. But then we need to think about the realities of curatorial day-to-day work in the museum as well. And we're constantly playing those three off each other within the context of our policy makers and our funders and those other wider societal contexts. That's one by one thinking, is thinking in that holistic way. Lauren, in a moment, you're going to take us into the kind of Q&A for that last kind of 15 minutes, so we can have a really good chat with everybody about where we are. Just so we don't forget and we don't run out of time, just so you know, look us up one by one. AAMC and Monica and Judith will be able to put you in contact with us, and you can find our names online, find out more about the Digital Commons as well. That's where we live. That's our virtual kind of central park where we've all got our buildings all around the edge, and we're kind of coming out and working together and then going back into our different kind of cohorts and groups. We're learning together. We're researching together. We've put an unprecedented international collaboration together. We identify a particular community that needs particular needs. We swarm around them, put everybody around them that they need, help that individual, that museum, that network, that group of museums. And then as we learn from that, there's insights that we can share more widely. There's a university at the heart of this. It means that there's nothing that's being sold. There's not a particular policy agenda. We're creating that safe environment, that open, diverse kind of collective environment for doing this sort of work. If it sounds exciting, lean into your partners at AAM and AAMC and all the others, MCN on the call today, and see how you can get involved and how you can contribute. We're excited to announce that our big US partner for this year that's joining us and will be leading the NEH project is Dr. Hytham Eid from SUNO, from Southern University at New Orleans. So HBCU, fantastically diverse museum studies program that Hytham's leading. And Hytham and his researcher, so he will be recruiting, leaves pause for dramatic excitement of job to be advertised. The researcher that can join us and become the third research associate on this work will be leading a track of research over 18 months into, and this is important and it's hard to say, but my goodness, it speaks directly to what Sandra said in the first session, calling out where the technology space is not equitable. I'm even going to quote, I think, what Sandra said in the last workshop. Who's not in the room? When it comes to Muse Tech, when it comes to digital cultural heritage, Who's not in the room when we're making these decisions about digital change? What does digital leadership look like within the UK and US? What does it sound like? Culturally, where it is? What's its identity? Who's not being included? So we're going to be asking some very difficult questions, but my goodness, important questions that need to be said finally in this context of technology around race, around gender, around women in tech. I have a lived experience around disability and impairment. So we're going to be thinking about to what extent those workspaces we're creating and those new digital infrastructures that we're building in our art museums, are they accessible to everyone? So as well as continuing to think about the business processes and continuing to think about how we can build digital courage and the agency of our workers within our sector, particularly at a time of precarity, we're also going to be bringing in this new dimension, which speaks to this emotive, affective dimension that we're bringing in, this emotional turn to museum technology. And it's conversations about equality, equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility within this space. So forging new connections in this area. We're so motivated by this. We hope you are as well. So follow us, contribute to us, let us learn from you, but lean in as well if you'd like to be part of the collective and you'd like to join one by one. Lauren, I'm sure there's comments and observations and sharing that's been going on through the Q&A. Maybe you can navigate our way through that for the next 15 minutes or so we can have a good conversation.
Excellent. I'm going to choose this first question based on how you just ended that kind of call to action for people to join us. But in the October 2020 Digital Readiness and Innovation in Museums report, one key point had been that digital project outcomes are poorly tracked and poorly iterated upon. How do you feel One by One could help address this issue?
Carolyn, are you okay for me to jump in first? And then, but please, because I think you're always helping us to think about that. I can say some things, and when I say this list I'm about to give you, Lauren, I know it might sound like an automatic list of, well, he would say that, but hopefully you can attest and Carolyn can attest to the fact that we live this. So number one, it's multiple outputs, because our audiences and those individuals who need to respond to these insights and want to work with these tools, they can't access an academic journal that sits behind a paywall. That's a waste of time. Trying to work through an impenetrable, terse report with 25 recommendations doesn't excite, it doesn't compel, and it frankly isn't readable and usable. So that's why one of the big outputs from our last project is the podcast, People Change Museums. Dr. Sophie Frost leads that. And we actually literally had a rock and roll moment in the last 4 days because Rolling Stone magazine cited the podcast. So the One by One project is in Rolling Stone magazine, it's official. Thinking about how we can create accessible resources. So thinking about the format of our resources, making sure that we put them in places where they can be seen and used. And frankly, doing what we're doing now, and not just writing up and moving on and looking away, but staying and explaining and involving and revisiting, and then most importantly of all, actively listening to what we need to be doing differently. So it's the format of what we produce, it's where we put that content, and then what we do after that moment of publication so that we still have a responsibility to be with that content and interact with it and those around it. Carolyn, what else should we be doing, and what else have we been doing to make sure that those outputs don't fade away or are inaccessible?
Well, I mean, you have developed a lot of resources which are available to people, but I think this is also about really understanding how to, really going back to that question about what is important for your organization, what is impactful, what does impact look like? And that might look different for different audiences. It might be anything from increasing revenue to views on a page to people writing comments. I mean, engagement can be both quantitative and qualitative. And I think as an organization, you have to decide what's important around the different activities that you are proposing. And and therefore you can start to attribute the right tools to measure that impact. but it's also really important that you understand the questions you want to ask, because if you don't understand the questions, then actually being able to evaluate the impact becomes very difficult. So being very intentional about the things that you're planning and doing, and really think about, what are the desired outputs that we want to see? What is the change that we want to see as a result of doing this action? And again, that needs to happen at the top and needs to cascade down, because if your leadership don't understand why you're doing what you're doing or why it's important, then how on earth are your staff supposed to know? So it's really, again, which is why I love this topic. It is layers of an onion, Again, this is strategic. Again, this is about building digital literacy and digital confidence, and in many cases, data literacy and understanding. We collect so much data across our organizations. Most of it is in a drawer that no one looks at, and probably also isn't being stored in a way that's compliant. But so actually getting a grip on understanding your data and being able to translate that into meaningful impact for, if you're a curator, what should I be looking at? What should I care about? If I'm a marketeer, what should I look at? What should I care about? If I'm a director, what should I look at? What should I care about? And they may be 3 different things based on the same piece of data. So this, again, is another conversation that we need to be having if we truly want to be 21st century organizations.
Absolutely.
So we have worked with a lot of larger institutions. Let's be our research cohorts. So this next question is, how can we reach institutions that need this support but are not as resourceful finding it or aware that it exists or even understand how they might benefit from it?
I mean,
Carolyn, do you want to go first? Or?
I was going to say, from my perspective, I think this is where organizations like AAMC and AAM and MCN can really help. In terms of being able to go to those institutions, those organizations, and be directed to either where there are resources or to projects like One by One, or conferences that are happening, or mentoring opportunities. So for me, there is I think as a museum, however small, reaching out to your network as your starting point. And starting to develop a sense of what are the key questions that you're trying to answer. Where is your need? Again, that idea of starting from where you are, which may be very different to some of the bigger organizations. But there's lots of help out there. And I think that as AAMC and AAM and MCN become more in touch with these initiatives and with these opportunities, that they're a really great place to start.
The projects we've done, we've been so aware of this. We in a way, the Smithsonian, we almost see them kind of floating in the middle of the Atlantic as a museum that's part of the world but outside the world. They are the issues that Carolyn and her partner and in the other units in the Smithsonian are engaging with are so exceptional, because of the exceptional way the Smithsonian is structured, and yet they really do speak to challenges that many other museums pose. But the Smithsonian provides us with a stage. We always said it's a platform, it's a stage to play out some of this work in a kind of safe space. The insights then go to everyone, and the opportunities for interaction are meant to be with everyone. So in the UK, in the first iteration of the project between 2017 and 2020, we had interventions in 6 museums of very different sizes across the UK, from small local authority museums, a charitable trust, to a national a museum as well. We partner with the Museum Development Network, who are the network of practitioners across the UK who support very, very small organisations. We support Culture 24 in their leadership programme, which is working with heritage organisations of all sizes across the UK with this work. What we want to do better And what you can help us do is to think about how we can make sure that the work we do, those tools we're creating, the deck of cards, the thought processes, care and calm, the case studies, the podcast, the resources, the way that we can source new funding, the NEH grant we now have, the AHRC grant, other grants. How can we work to partner with you and some smaller organizations to make real change? Our communities of practice partners, MCN and MCG, are so important in that regard, as are our professional bodies partners, the Museums Association and AAAM. But please, we need to learn from you how we can be better at this, and we can make sure this project is inclusive, because it honestly and genuinely wants to be and is trying to be.
And I would add to that within project number 3, we are taking a really active role in working out loud, researching out loud. So we have our traditional academic outputs for sure, and the types of more formal branded resources as we've had in the last 2 projects. But we're also working towards having really plain language conversations and a series of events that are not just happening with our research cohort, but are happening with all of you. So we really want you to get involved in those conversations, to get involved in those workshops, those master classes, etc., because we know that this needs to be scaled beyond a select few. Now, we don't have very much time left, but I'd love for you to to think about your closing words or responses by thinking about what many have expressed in the Q&A, in that, how do we prevent, how do we take all this wonderful change that has happened through 2020 and continues through 2021, whether it was forced upon us or we grabbed onto it with both hands, but how do we make this change stick? How do we not go back to the status quo? How does digital become truly embedded?
I guess what I would say, just really briefly, which I really said in my other comments, was I don't believe we can go back. And so really, as a museum, every museum is reimagining their future. What does it look like? And, where does digital fit into your overall planning and your overall mission and strategy? How can it help you to deliver on those things? How does digital work sit alongside your physical exhibitions and your physical museum experience? And what do you need to do to get to where you want to be as an organization? So, starting to lay out that strategy framework, working across the museum. If you are a curator and this is not your primary responsibility, how can you work with your colleagues who perhaps it is their responsibility, or with your leadership, if you don't have a digital team, to think about to do this thinking together and to really open that conversation. And again, start from where you are, do things that are realizable and sustainable for you, and that you can build on and learn from, and create the conditions for change where having these conversations feels safe, and where experimentation and trying things is built into the fabric of your organization. I know it's not easy, and it does put a lot of strain on individuals to drive this, but the rewards are immense, and I believe will take us to a better place.
Wow. Sorry, just catching my breath after that beautifully summarized point, Carolyn, as ever. How do we make this stick? How do we absolutely prevent this slipping away and evaporating? Let's commit to the challenge. We can't half-heartedly just acknowledge this or pick this up with one hand. Let's do what Carolyn's done, Lauren's done, and a network of other museums have done, and said, this is important. We are committing to this. It's going to be visible in our organization. We're going to be vocal about this, and we're going to center this conversation. And by having these framings, we can do that. We can be that advocate for this conversation, and be a persuasive and convincing advocate, a compelling advocate for this case as well. Let's also embrace the complexity as well as committing. It's hard. It's okay to say it's hard. So let's embrace that complexity and understand that it's multidimensional, it's holistic in your organization, and each individual is going to have to find its own way through this. So we're going to have to do the hard work on this. So let's absolutely commit and let's absolutely embrace. But let's trust each other as well, that the way that we will make this work within the sector across the AAMC community and across museums in America and internationally is we collaborate. We do what we're doing this evening and reaching out and holding hands with organizations we haven't worked with in this area. Respect, empathize, trust those organizations, learn from each other, know that expertise is right across that network of people, and bring in a university partner, bring in a commercial partner, bring in a policymaker, a funder, the other museums around you. There are ways that you can build those collaborations in a way that you can work productively together. And hopefully that's one of the things that our experience in the UK is showing in the US. And a final sentence, Lauren, if I may, I think it has to be, this will work when we realize together, as we are doing, that this isn't just about getting the technology to work and the hardware and software to be compatible and interoperable and knowing about which cables and codes to use. It's partly that. It's not just about knowing how to write a digital strategy and how to build digital policy within your institution and know which systems to use and what protocols to set in place and how digital can inform the business culture within and systems within your organization. It's not just that, but it's partly that. It will stick. It will last when we absolutely center people. And we understand that it's hard to lead digital change and you need to develop those skills that Lauren is helping us understand. And it's hard being part of digital change. We need to start understanding the emotional labor that's involved in orientating your identity, your role, your ways of working to new digital habits. Let's start being honest about that. Let's start talking about that. And my goodness, as we do that, it gives us a chance to talk about equity and inclusiveness at the same time. And that has to be an important thing. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Carolyn. I will just say, take care, to be calm. Thanks to all of you, and I'll hand it over to Monica.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Monica Valenzuela. I'm Program Manager for AAMC and AAMC Foundation. A huge thank you for joining our program today, and to Ross, Carolyn, Lauren, for so generously sharing your experiences, your expertise with us so candidly today. And a special shout out to all of our friends and partners on this series. As Ross just said, we can't do this without your collaboration. So thank you. Would you like to revisit or share today's conversation? It will be archived and available immediately on our YouTube channel. The link has been posted in the chat. And we do hope that you can join us for our next and final session in this series, where we can discuss ways forward. Registration for that session is open and available at artcurators.org. Thank you again, stay well, and hope you can join us again soon.